today, I guess Mr. Bill Brown is going to be our main speaker. Everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with Mr. Brown. I would not have time to read all the accolades that belong to him, but we are very pleased to have you here. And we will turn the program over to him now.
Is the mic going? Okay, all right. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all again. Last month, Ernie asked me if I remember when the US 17 was rerouted over the bridge down there. And it's my recollection it was around 1958. But I'd like to tell you a little bit of the story of US 17. Back in the early 20s, the Highway Department of the state of Georgia built a causeway across the Delta area and replaced two bridges down south, one over the St. Mary's River and one over the Flotilla River. And the highway was originally called the Atlantic Coastal Highway. And we had a member of this church, Judge D.W. Krause, who was, when he was a practicing attorney, once drew a deed for a little parcel of land on the east side of the Darien Highway, and he got a little flowery on the description. He described it as that parcel of land lying on the east side of Atlantic Coastal Highway, that river of concrete running from the rocky shores of Maine to the sandy shores of Florida. But he forgot to say that it was in Blaine County, Georgia, so he had to draw a deed of correction later. But the highway was originally a two-lane road on a 75-foot right-of-way, and it came down Glen Avenue to Gloucester Street and made a right-angle turn on Gloucester, down Gloucester to Newcastle, turned right on Newcastle, down to G Street, past the courthouse, on over to Norwich Street, and out Norwich to the Fork. And the people that were not familiar with the sharp right angle turn at the corner of Gloucester and Glen Avenue would often have problems navigating that sharp turn. And one night there was a truckload of circus elephants on their way back to Sarasota for the winter, and they missed the turn and wound up in the marsh alongside of Gloucester Street. They got the elephants out of the trailer up on the road, hooked the chain to the trailer and pulled the truck and the trailer back up on the road. And a lot of the local fellows had been on the island drinking, and when they came to the corner of Gloucester and Glen Avenue, and they saw three elephants standing in the road, and some of them swore off drinking for a whole month. One Sunday we were having dinner at Fort Glen Avenue, and two couples from Savannah were heading back to Savannah, and they were flying down Gloucester Street. They missed the turn. We heard the tires screech, and Bob looked up just in time to see the trees on the deck beneath the car, and it went into the creek, rolled over upside down. But fortunately, the tide was just low enough where just the wheels were spinning, and Bob and I rushed down there, and he jumped in the creek and heard him, the people screaming in there, and he opened the door to let them out, and 3 whiskey bottles went floating down the stream. But I was wearing a brand new pair of pants for my Sunday suit, and I wasn't about to get moist mud on those pants. So I took them off and folded them up, and I was fixing to jump in and help him when I looked around, and there were about 10 or 12 people standing there. So I put my pants back on and went home. Anyway, the road went out Norwood Street to the Forks, and took a left and went down across Blythe Island, across Kansas County on to the Florida line. But back in the 30s, the tourists started coming down by car. Previously to that, most of the tourists to Florida had gone by steamer or by train, but in the 30s they started driving, and more and more of them started driving, and people started converting the big homes along Gloucester Street, Flint Avenue to tourist homes. There was the Anchorage Hotel, the Monte Vista Lodge, the Shady Rest tourist home, and on Gloucester Street, the A.B. Wood home was converted into a tourist home, and they built a little hotel called Wisteria Inn. But downtown there was the Oglethorpe Hotel on the west side of Newcastle, and the Royal Hotel on the east side. And they routed the tourists all the way through towns where all the merchants would have a shot at them. And they ran them by the courthouse, the county courthouse, and the Manitowoc grounds. And somewhere along the way, they got a flock of peacocks that roamed the ground, and the tourists thought they were right attractive, but the county finally got tired of cleaning up behind them, so they got rid of them. But out around the Forks, the tourists, there was a couple of tourist camps out there. They had cabins with attached garages, and some of the local tourists found the attached garages helpful. But anyway, that was part of the interest. And then in the 1950s, Ernie, they built the first Lanier Bridge across the river out there. And the reason it was built in that particular location was that Warren Neal, a local highway engineer and a highway contractor, owned the Joiner Island, or Little Joiner Island, and they persuaded Charlie Gowan, a local representative in the legislature, to get a bill passed allowing the A1 Toll Road Authority to build a toll road from Fernandina to 50 miles into Georgia. And the 50 miles would have ended right at the end of the Sydney Lanier Bridge, and the road was going right between Little Georgia and Big Georgia, which would give them access to the highway. But before the bonds had been let, but before construction began, the motel operators on Highway 17 in Camden County hired Way Highsmith to get an injunction to stop the opening of A1A into Georgia, and that killed the deal. But the contractor had already been let for the building of the Sydney Lanier Bridge, and it was finished in 1958, and Highway 17 was rerouted over the bridge and where it is at the present time. Well, going back to the 1930s, as you remember, the stock market crashed in '29, and Howard Coffin, who owned the Sea Island Company. He lived on Sapelo of Oldham, and lived on Sapelo. He died, and Alfred Jones Sr. inherited the Sea Island Company and deployed it. And in 1930, business was pretty well dried up. Money was right short, and they paid the employees of the Sea Island Company was a paper IOU called Script. And our father was in the real estate business as a salesman, and real estate sales dried up all of them. As I say, money was right tight. He told a story about writing 5 letters to prospects and not having a dime to mail them because the postage was only 2 cents a stamp then. And gasoline was about 18 cents a gallon, but he didn't have money enough to buy gas to run his 1928 Studebaker, so he left it in the garage for months at a time. And when it was my recollection that every Sunday afternoon our father would take me and Bob and Sarah and 2 younger girls, and we walked all the way from Fort Worth Avenue to 1200 Dartmouth Street to visit our grandmother and his mother. And Bob had to pull James and Julie in a little red wagon, but the rest of us walked, and we had to sit on a rather uncomfortable sofa in the parlor all Sunday afternoon looking at a picture on the wall of 3 sheep grazing next to the stone wall. I still remember that picture. Occasionally our father would give us a treat and walk us down to the wet basin further down in the south end. And one afternoon we arrived just in time to see him pull a body up out of the water. A sailor had fallen off the sailing vessel and drowned. And we had bad dreams for a while. But that was a real treat because Bob and I could get rocks off the ballast rocks off the railroad track and throw them in the water. That was quite a relief from sitting there looking at those 3 sheep grazing. I'll always remember that. But in 1931, Alfred Jones, or Bill Jones Sr., went to Washington and got an RFC, a Reconstruction Finance loan, and redeemed all the IOUs they had out. And he said when he finally kept the cloister going, and when he finally paid the loan off several years later, he vowed never to borrow another dollar, and he followed that philosophy the rest of his life. And his son, Bill Jones Jr., also followed that, but Bill III wandered astray and borrowed a little more than he should have. But anyway, that's part of the story of the Sea Island Company in those days. But in 1932, our father decided to run for a seat in the Georgia House of Representatives on a reform platform. He and some other people thought there was some shenanigans going on in the county courthouse that needed to be corrected, and he ran on a reform platform and got elected. And John Carr's grandfather and one of his uncles, John Bell, helped my father on election day, and John was driving the Studebaker down Gloucester Street hauling voters to the polls, and he looked up and saw a wheel rolling down ahead of him, and he said, well, I know somebody lost the wheel, and found out it was his front, one of his front wheels. But election night, my father carried me down to the courthouse, and it was filled with mostly supporters of the sheriff. The sheriff had confiscated enough whiskey, moonshine whiskey during the year to be able to give all of his supporters a drink or two, and many of them were feeling no pain. In fact, there was one little short fellow standing on the landing to the second floor of the courthouse, and he started down and missed the first step, rolled the rest of the way down, got up, shook his head, and staggered out the side door. But speaking of prohibition, 1932 was about the last year of prohibition, and there was a local fellow, F.D.M. Strawn, who owned the Strawn Shipping Company, and he was a Scotsman, and he had a special boat built to go out from Brunswick to the seabuoy and meet McCoy. And there was a rum runner named McCoy that used to run a route from Nassau in the Bahamas to New York. And if you bought your whiskey from McCoy, you knew you had the real thing. And that's where that expression, the real McCoy, came from. And one day, Strawn's boat went out, met McCoy, headed back in. The Coast Guard got after him, and they had twin motors. They outran the Coast Guard and ran across a sandbar opposite the pier or high water, dropped the whiskey off, came on up to Terry Creek, and when the Coast Guard stopped them, they had nothing, so they couldn't do anything about it. And that afternoon, the operator went back and picked up his whiskey. And they tell the story about Mr. Strong. He was a rough and ready Scotsman, and he applied to the Jack Lowland Club for membership, and they turned him down. So he went to St. Simon's, bought a lot on the Sound near the pier, built a big summer cottage there, and every afternoon he sat on his front porch drinking his scotch, and he had a small cannon in the front yard that he would fire over at Jacob. But anyway, my father went to Atlanta in 1933, and the legislature got several reform bills passed, and came home feeling right proud of himself, and the courthouse crowd put Frank Scarlett on the train, sent him to Atlanta, and he got Governor Eugene Talbot to veto most of the bills. But one of the bills that he let stand was one adopting the Australian ballot. Previously, the ballots were numbered, and when you checked in to vote, they wrote the ballot number by your name so that you go back and check and see how everybody voted. And they also had a $2 poll tax in those days, and there was some question about how the record was kept on the number of people that were eligible to vote. But anyway, in 1934, my father ran for re-election, but the courthouse crowd ran Colin Dogger, a local lawyer, against him, and Dogger won. And but that was probably a good thing. It gave him more time to sell real estate. But back in the right after the Depression started, the New York company that owned the Windsor Park subdivision over there went into bankruptcy, and Dick Gould was appointed receiver under the bankruptcy court. He held an auction, and the vacant lots over there in Windsor Park sold for $25 a piece. And Carl Liddell bought two, and Charlie Bruce bought two, and they later built their homes on it. But the lots that originally sold, the ones on the boulevard, had sold for $1,500 a piece. But in the auction, they sold for $25. There was a lot of vacant land in Windsor Park, and Captain John Hodge and his family were members of this church. Captain John Hodge was captain of the tugboat Inca, and he ran a small dairy. He and his family lived on Lee Street, and right behind there on Magnolia Avenue, he had a small dairy there. And he used to graze his cows out in Windsor Park during the day, and a lot of the local courting couples used Windsor Park at night for courting ground. And one time, some of the high school boys thought it would be fun to ride around and shine lights for the couples in the cars. Until one of the fellows got out one night and broke out a windshield out of the boy's car, and he decided that wasn't as much fun as he thought it was going to be. But in 1934, you didn't have to have a license to drive a car. You just had to be at least 16 years old. And when I turned 16 in December of 1934, and a neighbor of ours, Ernest Paulson, had hurt his back one time, and he wasn't able to drive long distances, and he told me that he would take me and Bob squirrel hunting if I would drive his car from Arco to the Omaha Swamp at the end of Pennick Road. So I had never driven a car before, but I seemed to shift gears and use the clutch, and he drove out to Arco, and I got under the wheel, and we drove on down to the Omaha Swamp down Pennick Road, and went squirrel hunting and came back, and I only met one car. And I only met one car, fortunately, because Pennick Road was not too wide. They had a deep ditch on the side, and I had to pull over and let the car go by. But I've been driving ever since, which in December will be around 78 years. But I've been real fortunate. But in 1935, my brother and I were members of the local Sea Scout unit here in Brunswick, and we used to meet down at the wet basin. We had a meeting room down there on the edge of the wet basin, and one day my brother and I went down early to do some carpenter work on the building, and when we finished the work, we got in a rowboat and started rowing to the quarantine station. The skipper of the unit lived on quarantine, and he had a motorboat that he rowed back and forth in, and it was a real treat to ride in a motorboat, because prior to that time, the only thing we had was a pair of oars. But about halfway down, we broke out our lunch. We'd asked our sisters to prepare for us, and bit into it, and my tea piece vibrated, and I opened the thing, and the bologna sandwich was made out of a piece of red inner tube. And the mustard and marinade and everything on it. That was a real thrill. We never asked them to prepare another lunch for us. But I used to, our father used to let me part of the 1928 Studebaker and drive to the meeting at night. And one night I was going down there, went across the railroad track, which ran at a 45-degree angle across the road, and there was so much play in the front end of the front wheel that the railroad tracks grabbed the wheels, and we went bounding down the rail. The cross ties heading for the end of the line, and there was a switch engine down there coming back, and if you ever looked at the headlight of a switch engine in front of you, it's not a very pleasant feeling, but I was fortunate to get in reverse and get back on the road where I was supposed to be. But anyway, speaking of the Sea Scouts, we made a cruise to Jacksonville in 1935, and we spent 2 or 3 days down there. And on the way back, we were cruising down the St. Johns River, and we were on a 40-foot boat that belonged to Leo Ross, and we were towing a rowboat up the Battle, and Diddy Taylor noticed there was some water in the boat, so he pulled it up, got in, was bailing the water out, and he thought, all of a sudden he decided he'd have a little fun, so he threw water on the boys on the stern of the boat, and they reciprocated by getting a bucket, a deck bucket, and throwing water on him. And he was getting the worst of the encounter, so he took off his clothes, and we were having a great time throwing water back and forth, and all of a sudden we heard a ship blowing, and the SS Iroquois was inbound to Jacksonville with 200 passengers lining the rail, waving at Diddy, standing there in his birthday suit. And the only thing he had to cover up with was a 1-pound coffee can. But anyway, at one time the Sea Scouts, part of the program was to encourage boys at that age to start having some social activities. So one Sunday the skipper made arrangements for take us all down to Little Cumberland for a picnic, and everybody was supposed to bring a date. And one of the boys, Lawrence Harrington, brought Mark Neal Turner, our biology teacher, who was just a few years older than we, and he had a very shapely figure. And we were playing on a 30-foot sand dune down there, and we were running back down the sand dune, and Brahma came up behind her and clipped her, and she rolled down to the bottom and wound up bottom first in a brick repair bush at the bottom, and all the boys abandoned that days to help pick the thorns out of Mark Neal's sleep. But we had some good times in those days. But in 1936, our father his income had improved, and he bought a 1936 Lincoln Zephyr. That was a 12-cylinder Lincoln automobile with a streamlined body. The back sloped down, and it was quite an impressive car. And our father ran for the state senate that year and was elected. And in 1937, when he was in the legislature, we went up to see him, and he introduced all of his family to his friends up there, and they thought I was his brother instead of his son, and that made him beam and made me a little sad that I looked that old at that time. But anyway, that summer, a committee from the Game and Fish committee came down to Brunswick on a junction, and my father persuaded the county to give them a fish fry and a shrimp boil at Neptune Park for the lunch before they left, and they had a table about this long full of boiled shrimp about that high, and no one was eating any shrimp until somebody passed the word that those shrimp will give you love life a lift. And in about 30 minutes, the table was bare and the shrimp balls all over the ground. There was an Atlanta reporter from the Atlanta Journal, I believe it was, and I had driven my father over to the occasion, and he asked me to take him back to the train. He had to catch the 1:30 train back to Atlanta, and I started across the island, and I was speeding because time was a little tight. I was trying to get him to the train on time, and right past the Frederica Bridge, there was a right severe dip in the causeway, and I went over. I was alternating my view from the speedometer to the rear view mirror looking for the police, and I went over that dip, and the rear wheels came off, and that speedometer went from 60 miles an hour to 70 to 80 to 90, and hit 120 and pounds, and my stomach came right up here. I thought to myself, I'm flying and I don't have a license. But there wasn't much conversation between me and the gentleman, but I got him to the train on time. But anyway, in 1937, I went to, my father had made enough money to send me to college, and I couldn't get into Emory in Atlanta because I'd never taken a foreign language in high school, and the reason for that was the fact that I was signed up to take French. I bought my French book, opened it, and looked at all those funny words, and thought to myself, this is not for me. And I looked at my schedule, and I could substitute French for third-year history, and the first afternoon, if you wanted to make a change on your schedule, you went to see Mr. Hood in his office, and that old Miss Lott in the lobby, and I had figured it out that I could make that change, and I bypassed Mr. Hood. I just went over to Miss Lott and told her I want to change French for the history, and she made the change, and I sold my French book to Joe Whittles, and he took French, but I went through high school with no language, and they wouldn't let me in Emory, Atlanta, but they wouldn't let me in Emory Junior in Valdosta. And so I went over there for 2 years, 37, 39, and that was a right interesting experience. We had 60 students in September, and after the Christmas exam, 30 of them came back. So we had 30 students and 7 instructors, and you really don't need that much personal attention in college. But anyway, I found out later the reason the attendance was so poor was that the superintendents of South Georgia wouldn't recommend that their students attend every unit because the course was so tough they flunk out. and every time they had to give this thing during the war, they gave it to the state of Georgia. There was a women's college in Valdosta, and they gave it to the women's college. It became the North Campus. But we had a lot of Florida boys attending Emory Junior because Florida had no medical school in those days, and several of them would try to get into Emory, and time was still right tight, and there was one Jewish boy from Miami. He could write a complete letter on the back of a postcard with small print, and send it home for a penny. And we had one boy from Tallahassee used to write his parents a postcard periodically, and he would address it to Ma and Pa, Post Office Box 34, Tallahassee. And anyway, we had a right interesting time. The faculty over there, they finally closed Emory Unit during the war, and the faculty moved on. The dean of the school wound up as president of Duke University. My French instructor, we nearly ran him crazy. Tried to teach French to these South Georgia boys because we said ooey monster, and he'd pull his hair. But he went on to become a college president and wound up president of the University of Miami for 14 years. And my English instructor, who required us to write a theme every week, and the only A I made on the whole year was on the subject of writing a theme, the agony of writing a theme. I wrote it in 30 minutes because I knew what I was talking about. And the psychology professor wound up as the head of the psychology department at Davidson, and the rest of them moved on to the Emory campus. But anyway, it was a right interesting experience. And one afternoon, I had a Jewish friend from Miami, Parrot Scheinberg, who was practicing archery in front of the administration building. I walked over and watched him, and shortly after I got there, he took an arrow and shot it straight up in the air. And I looked up and followed it for about 100 feet and blinked my eyes and lost sight. And then I didn't know whether to run or stand still. That's a bad feeling. But I finally stood still, and it fell somewhere else. It reminded me of that little story about the guy that said, I shot an arrow into the air, it fell to earth, I know not where. I lose both damn arrows that way. But anyway, that was a right interesting experience, and I came home in 39, and Bob, my brother, was able to go to college for 2 years, and he'd been working on the Army Corps of Engineers survey board as a deckhand, and I was able to fill in where he left off. And the winter of 39, the Jekyll Island Club was still in operation, and they asked the Corps to make a survey to tell them how they could slow down the erosion of the sand dunes over there that were encroaching on on the golf course. So we went over there in February on a cold, cloudy day in February, and we walked across the island with the Corps engineers. And I had on all the clothes I could wiggle in, and on the beach there were several of the club members, younger club members, playing handball in their undershirt. And the reason they were over there in '39, that storm clouds were gathering in Europe, and they elected not to go back to the Riviera in France, so they came to Jacob. And the Corps ran a survey and found it told the club it'd be better, it'd be less expensive if they just moved the golf course and try to stop the erosion of the Atlantic Ocean on their golf course. But when I worked with the Corps, I couldn't help but think now about how progress has been made in technology. There were no ship-to-shore radios with a boat to the ship, and one night we had to deliver a telegram to the dredge that was working on the outer bar, telling one of the crew members that had been a death in the family they wanted to come home. So we went out to the dredge, spoke to the dredge, and told them what our problem was. While we were there, they threw a heaving line over to me, and I untwisted the line, put the telegram in the line, and passed it back to the dredge, and they gave it to the crew member. We had to wait till he got a suitcase packed, took him on board and brought him back to go to return home. And the way we did harbor and the outer bar surveying in those days was a leadman casting a sounding lead, 5-pound sounding lead on a lead line that was marked off in feet and tenths of a foot. And on the outer bar, we built a platform across the after cockpit of the boat. We had a right-handed sounder on the right-hand side and a left-handed sounder on the left-hand side. And they would each make a cast, and they had an engineer on a platform on Jacob, and an engineer on the balcony of the court of the place of the lighthouse, and they would shoot angles on each one of them, and the timer on the boat had a synchronized watch. And when the timer would call time, it was my job to hoist a large flag on a bamboo staff, and they would shoot an angle on the flag, and the two leadmen would sound and call off the depth. The recorder would record the depth and the time, and then they'd go back to the office to calculate where that particular spot was. And one day we were out there, the waves were running about 5 or 6 feet high, and it always amused me that Teddy System, the left-hand sounder, made a cast one day, and he called out 26-3, 26-4, 26-5, and the waves running 5 or 6 feet high. And one time he made a cast and the boat yawned to the left, and the lead fell on the forward deck of the boat. Anyway, all in all, the 1930s were right interesting decade, and I'm glad I had the privilege of living through them.
again. And I want you to all be sure and know that we were grateful enough to have Jim Wells here again to record. And it will be on our, online. I'll get the link for you. But I looked at it last time, and it was so helpful to be able to see it again after hearing it with a few interruptions as people are coming and going. So if you're interested in seeing it again, I mean, watching it, it will be available. So I will let you know. And if anybody had any, I'm interrupted, anyway, okay. Good. Bill, there's a picture in today's paper, the flooding in Brunswick down
Oh, yeah.
on Newcastle Street. Hasn't that always
Always been there. It used to flood in McGarvey furniture stores.
Yeah.
They used to put a wood panel in front of the door to keep the water out. And I sold it to the Moy brothers, and they remodeled it and elevated the floor to the present elevation so that the tide wouldn't flood it. But it's been doing that forever. In fact, in 1898, in the hurricane of 1898, Mansfield Street was tidal. The drain went all the way up to Union Street, and Ralph McRae's father ran a livery stable on the edge of Mansfield Street, and in the hurricane of 1898, they weren't using the Baptist church, so he carried 5 or 6 of the mules from the livery stable, put them in the church, and during the hurricane of 1898, they were a little unkind to the premises. They chewed up the hymn book, gnawed up the back of the pew, and messed up the floor. And the Baptists were wanting to run the prayer, who was an Episcopalian out of town. And his answer was, he didn't know why everybody got upset. It wasn't the first time they'd had a bunch of jackasses in that church. In 1944, we had a hurricane that came by, and I was in the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and we went out and got people out of the war park was out around Goodyear Park, where the hospital is now. And that afternoon, after we had finished our task, we were riding down Newcastle Street. The water was about waist deep in 1944, and there was a guy paddling a John boat along in front of the Beasley Theater. We rode by him rather rapidly with the truck, and the weight from the truck sank the boat, and we looked back, and he was standing in water waist deep, shaking his paddle out of the curtain. So it's not the first time it's flooded.
So do we get to hear the 40s next month?
If y'all can stand it.
Well, not next month, we have something for Christmas, but we'll do some more.
All right, okay, all right, okay.